Hey guys, this is Steve. Welcome to this beginner guide on overclocking your GPU to get the best performance. Like I said, overclocking your GPU is actually really simple. Unlike overclocking your CPU where you need to go into your BIOS settings, most commonly GPU overclocking is actually done through an application on your desktop, so there's not even any need to reboot after every overclock, so that makes it way easier and actually a lot safer in my opinion. So there's really not that much risk in overclocking your GPU, as most modern GPUs nowadays have thermal limits put into them, so they automatically kind of downclock if they do start to hit their temperature limit, so there's really not even that much danger in overclocking your GPU. Sometimes you'll see manufacturers sell an overclocked model of their GPU for a higher price tag when basically you could do that overclocking yourself right on your own computer. Now, just like CPUs, there is kind of a silicone lottery that goes on with your GPU. Some GPUs will just overclock better than other GPUs, and there's a little bit of randomness to that. That's one of the reasons why the manufacturer ships them with a lower clock speed, just because occasionally you'll have one that just doesn't overclock very well. But for the most part, you can get a decent overclock on your GPU, and in my opinion, it's definitely worth it, because again, it's free performance. So I have two GTX 1080s that I'll be overclocking in this video, and I'm going to be using MSI Afterburner. It's pretty much the most commonly used application for overclocking your GPU, and in my opinion, it's the best. I've tried a few of them, and I just like the look and feel of MSI Afterburner, and it seems to be the most stable. So that's going to be our application. Okay, so over on our desktop now, we're going to need to install MSI Afterburner, as that's going to be the application I'm using. So go ahead and search up MSI Afterburner, or you could just follow the link in the description that I'll include. But you want to download, as of this video, 4.3 is the latest, so go ahead and download MSI Afterburner 4.3 stable right there. Go ahead and click it and download it. I've already downloaded it, so I don't really need to download it again, but you don't want to do that. All right, cool. And then on the onto installing it, I have it right here. You just want to double click on it, install it like any other application, except there is one extra application on this that you don't really need to install. So I'm going to show you that. Just accept the terms. And then River Tuner Statistics, that's something that I just don't really use much, so I'm not going to install it. But if you feel like you might need it, it's for monitoring and stuff, but MSI Afterburner has its built-in monitoring stuff as well, so I don't really need that extra bit of monitoring, so I just leave that uninstalled. Install MSI Afterburner. Go ahead and get that installing, and then once it's installed, we'll be ready to move on. But first, just like when we overclocked the CPU in my previous video, you're going to want to take some benchmarks before overclocking, so you can kind of have a baseline of what your GPU is capable of without any sort of overclocking. So I'm going to go ahead and finish that, and this is what MSI Afterburner looks like. But before we jump into this, I'm going to take some benchmarks of my computer without any overclock so we can compare it later. So what I'll be using to benchmark my GPU is Valley Benchmark. There's also Heaven Benchmark, but I kind of prefer Valley because it's a little newer and it feels like it's a little bit more intense on my GPU. So you're going to want to go ahead and download Valley Benchmark. Again, I'll leave a link in the description. But I'm just going to fire it up right here, and I have all of the settings set to extreme. I basically just take the Extreme HD preset there and run it. So that's all you have to do. Go ahead and click Run now, and we'll let that fire up. Okay, so here in Valley Benchmark, we want to let it run like it is automatically, just for a few minutes to kind of get your GPU up to temperature. Leave your GPU to be under load for a while, and let it kind of settle at what temperature it's going to sit at. And then once you've been here for a few minutes, you can click Benchmark, and we'll just do that now. To kind of see what our baseline score is before any overclocking is done. So I'm going to let this go. This usually takes about almost 10 minutes, I think. There's about 18 scenes that it goes through, and basically just really intense scenes for your GPU, and it just finds what it's capable of and gives you a nice baseline to start at. Okay, so our benchmark is finishing up now, and you can see that our temperature is sitting right around 70 degrees Celsius, which is very good, and we finished with a score of 88.9 average FPS and a score of 37 to 21. So that's not bad. I have a pretty powerful GPU, so that's kind of to be expected. But let's see if we can do some overclocking and make that better. Okay, so one more benchmark I want to run before we get into overclocking is the Blender BMW benchmark. Just so you Blender fans out there, just like me, can see how much better performance you get out of overclocking a GPU in Blender 3D rendering. So I'm going to go ahead and render. I'm rendering on just one GTX 1080 for this test. I'm not bothering to render with two, just so we can see the results on overclocking a single GPU and seeing what we get in before and after. Okay, and that finished in 32 seconds. So time to see if some overclocking can improve that score. Okay, you can go ahead and fire up MSI Afterburner and we can get to work. So before we change any of these confusing dials or anything, you're going to want to first go to the user preferences. So you click that gear right there and open up your user preferences, and there's a few settings you'll want to change. First of all, unlock voltage control. This will be unchecked by default, but you want to check that to be able to change the voltage settings on your core voltage. So you want to check that. And then secondly, what I like to do is I like to go to the user interface, and first off, I disabled the quick tips just because they kind of get in my way. You may find them useful, but I like them disabled. And then you can choose what kind of skin you want to use. Now, these are just skins, so they don't change the functionality at all of the app. But there's some really cool looking skins, and I usually actually use this one, the V3 skin. But I'm going to try the red one today just because it looks kind of cool. So the cyborg red one here is what I'm going to use for this video, but you can use whatever skin you want if you care about the look. It really doesn't have any other point than the look, but yeah. Okay, and then over in monitoring up here, I like to turn off everything that isn't related to the GPU. So just go ahead and uncheck all of your CPU settings here, because we don't need to monitor the CPU at all. We're just looking at our GPU speeds and temperatures and stuff like that. So just leave the GPU items enabled and disable this CPU. Alright, so that should be it for the user preferences. Now in MSI Afterburner. You can scroll down here and see your different GPU temperatures, powers, usage, and all that good stuff. I can't really... Can I expand this down at all? Let me see here. I don't think I can. Anyways, you kind of have to scroll through here to see the different settings. But they also have an overlay when you're in applications, so this isn't entirely necessary. But okay, let's get on to what some of these confusing settings are. So after enabling the core voltage, you're going to have to reopen MSI Afterburner if you want that core voltage here to be unlocked. But once it is, we can start overclocking. Now, one thing I didn't mention is in the settings here, you can synchronize the settings for two graphics cards. Now, like I said, I have two 1080s, so I am going to leave that on. It doesn't really matter if you have more GPUs or not, you can leave that on. And basically, it's just going to copy your settings from each GPU to the next when you overclock it. Okay, so with that done, I'm going to start overclocking. So first off, we're going to want to give our GPU as much voltage as it wants for overclocking. The more voltage it has, the more it can go higher on the clock. So we can go ahead and give it all the way 100% on the voltage. And it's only going to use that voltage if it needs it. So you don't have to worry about it like frying your chip or something because you're throwing a ton of volts at it. Because basically this is a little smarter than like your CPU, for example. And it's only going to use what it needs. Okay, now for the power limit, by default this is linked. And you want to leave it linked because basically it's going to give it as much power as it wants based on the temperature limit. So as long as it's under 72 degrees Celsius, which with my GPU it definitely will be, it has good cooling. You might want to make sure that your GPU has decent cooling and airflow. But if it has a decent cooler on it, you can go ahead and crank it all the way up to 92 degrees, and it will never hit that temperature. But this is just like a safety setting again. If it does hit that temperature, well then it won't, it will downclock or whatever and not give it that much power. Okay, so now that we have all the power it needs, we can start getting a bit of an overclock on our core. Now this is going to depend a lot on your GPU, how much overclock you can get. It depends if your GPU is already factory overclocked a little bit, for example. Mine is not. So I know I can get a decent overclock over, but just to be safe, I'm going to start with a 50 megahertz overclock. Now to apply this overclock, all we need to do is hit that check mark, and bam, your overclock is applied. So exciting. Our fan speed can be left on auto. That's just going to automatically make the speed of the fans depending on the temperature of your GPU. And if you want to mess around with a custom fan curve or something, you can do that, but I'm just going to leave it on auto, and I'm not going to touch the memory clock yet. So with that checked, our computer, our GPU, is running at a 50 megahertz overclock, and let's fire up Valley Benchmark and see if it's running stable. If everything is running good, we can push it further, and if we're having problems like artifacting or something, for example, we might want to crank it back a little bit. Okay, so it looks like everything is running beautifully. We're at a 50 megahertz overclock. You can see that our GPU is now running at 1950. I'm sorry about these flipping around. I had to flip the ports on my GPU, so that's why the GPU is now on top that's being used, and it wasn't bottom before, but don't worry about that. This is the GPU that's being used now, and it's at about a 50 megahertz overclock, and everything seems to be running perfectly fine. No issues, no glitching, and I think we can push it further. So I'm going to go ahead and quit out of this, and we're going to see if we can't get a 100 megahertz overclock on our GPU. Should be pretty easy to get that, but again, it might vary on your GPU again. So I'm going to go ahead and take this, and let's give it 100 megahertz on the clock. Hit that check mark. Okay, so we're at 100 megahertz overclock. You can see we're just about 2 gigahertz on our graphics core, and everything is running fine without a hitch. I don't see any sort of artifacting, no glitches or anything. It looks beautiful. So that's cool, and I think we can push it even further. Okay, so we saw that 100 megahertz overclocked perfectly with no issues whatsoever. Our temperatures were still good, and we were getting buttery smooth video. So I'm going to go ahead and see if I can't get away with 200 megahertz. Now 200 megahertz is a lot, but I know this GPU is a pretty good overclocker. You might want to try just 150 at this point and see if that works for you, but I'm going to try 200. And we'll see if it's still stable and perfectly glitch-free running the Valley Benchmark. And there we have it. We're running a 200 megahertz overclock now. We're at 2100 megahertz on our graphics, and temperatures are good. Video looks good, no glitches or anything. And it seems pretty stable to me. Now, you'd want to run it for quite a while to make sure that it's stable, but because it's still looking great, I'm going to continue pushing it further. And let's see if we can't get 250 megahertz. So that's a pretty big overclock. Let's see if we can't reach that though. Okay, so 250, here we go. Hit that check mark, and let's see what we get. Okay, so 250 was giving me some glitches. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to catch it on my screencast, but it just started lagging and getting choppy, and then it said that Valley Benchmark had to quit. So nothing too scary, but it just automatically quit because it knew that it was having issues or whatever. So let's see if I can't clock this down 25 megahertz and get 225 to work. All right, I'm going to hit 225, hit that check mark, so we're now overclocked, and let's run it again at this and see what we get now. And okay, so far it seems like 225 megahertz is the sweet spot. I'm not having any crashes or any issues, and I'm running at 2126 megahertz currently. So that's really decent, and I'm running at about 70 degrees Celsius, so not actually much different than when I started. I'm sure it would rise a little bit if I went through and benchmarked it for 10 minutes again, but it's still very safe, and we're getting great results. So with the 225 megahertz overclock, I would say that seems to be about the happy spot for this GPU. Now, everyone's going to be a little different. You want to just kind of fine-tune yours, but that's awesome. So let's see if we can overclock the memory now. Now that we kind of found what seems to be our sweet spot for the GPU core, let's see what we can get on the memory. So over in MSI Afterburner here, I'm going to take the memory, and well, the memory usually can get a bit more of an overclock than the core right off the bat. So I'm just going to see if I can't get 200 megahertz on the memory without issues. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Hit that check mark. Now, if you want to save your overclock, you use this button right here. You check that, and then you click which profile you want to save it to. So I'm going to save it to profile 1. These are just multiple profiles if you have different settings that you want on a different profile. So now it's saved to profile 1, and whenever I want those settings, I just click it, and it'll automatically put these in. For example, if I change that, I can hit that, and it's just going to resort back to it. So hit that check mark to save your overclock, and let's see if a 200 megahertz overclock on the memory works well for us. Alright, so there we have it, a 200 megahertz overclock on our memory. Still no glitches, still no weird artifacting or anything. Usually if you're hitting your limit, you'll start getting some blips and lines going through your footage, but I don't see any of that right now. It looks beautiful to me, so I say we keep pushing it further. Okay, so let's see if I can't get a 400 megahertz overclock on my memory. Whoops, sorry about that, bumped the mic. And there is the 400 megahertz overclock on the memory, and it's still seemingly beautiful. So like I said, this is a pretty good overclocker. Because it's not factory overclocked or anything, I can get a decent amount of overclock on these GPUs. But you may be seeing, a little worse results or something, but that's fine, that's normal. But so far, it seems like I'm still good to go. So I'm going to boost the megahertz all the way up to 600 on the memory now, and we'll see if that can handle it. So 600, confirm it with a check mark, and let's see what we get. I mean, at this point, I have my doubts, but we'll see. Okay, and we got the crash on Valley Benchmark due to I was seeing some artifacting and stuff at first, and then it just cut out on me. So I wasn't really able to capture all that, but it quit with the 600 megahertz overclock on the memory. Let's see if we can't get more by toning that down a little bit. So let's see if a 550 isn't stable. So I'm going to go ahead and check that again, and we'll fire it up and see what we get this time. All right, so 550 on the memory overclock here, and I'm still not seeing any artifacting. I mean, you might want to leave it for a while, because sometimes once the temperatures get up or something, you'll see a little bit of artifacting. But right now, it looks perfectly fine to me. So I'm going, whoop, actually, I just saw a little bit of a blip there. I don't know if you guys caught that, but there was that blip as it was fading between scenes there. And that's not something we really want. So I'm kind of seeing some artifacting going on actually now. I'm going to take the memory clock down to 500, and then I'll run my benchmark, and we'll see what kind of results we're getting. Alright, so here we have it at the 500 megahertz overclock, and everything seems to be fine as far as I can see. Again, you're going to want to kind of watch it for a while and see if you see any sort of artifacting or anything going on, any screen tearing. But it seems to be pretty decent for me at this point, so I'm going to run the benchmark, and we'll see how it compares to our baseline in the beginning with no overclock. Okay, and actually I just got another crash on Valley Benchmark, and I'm thinking that my core might be overclocked a little too much still. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce my core clock down to about a 220. 220 might just be a little bit more stable than 225. Sometimes the little tiny bits make a difference. So I'm going to try 220 on the core clock, then run Valley Benchmark and see if that's stable. Okay, so the benchmark finished without any issues this time, and that was at a 220 megahertz overclock on the core. You can see that my temperature is right around 76 degrees Celsius, so that's only about 5 degrees hotter overclocked, and our score is 4033. We got about a little over a 300 increase on our score, and our FPS average went from 88.9 to 96.4. So decent improvements on our GPU overclock, and with the temperature only being about 5 degrees higher Celsius. So very cool. Now what you can do at this point is you might be able to get away with less voltage on your core, because it's possible that your GPU isn't even using all the volts that you have available to it. Looking at the GPU power usage through our benchmark, you can see that for the most part it's not even hitting its power limit until right about there. It spiked and hit 108 at the power limit. So that is good. It's not even needing that much power most of the time. And I think that we could probably get away with less voltage at this point, because I don't even think it's needing that much voltage, and we might get a little cooler temperatures if we're not throwing quite as much volts at it. So I'm going to drop this down to, well, let's just cut it in half to start and hit that check mark and see if Valley Benchmark runs fine with half the amount of voltage or extra voltage added to it. Okay, so back in Valley Benchmark with half the amount of extra voltage given to it, and it seems to be fine on my current GPU. Like I said, certain GPUs might like a little bit more voltage, but it doesn't seem like this even needs that extra voltage that I was allowing it to have. So you might as well reduce your voltage amount a little bit and see if you get better results. Now, you do want to do a benchmark after reducing your voltages to see if you're getting possibly less score, and that might just be that your GPU is not getting enough voltage, so it's downclocking a little bit. So check to see if there's a difference in your benchmark by reducing the voltage, and if there isn't, well, you can leave it at less voltage and save a little power. But that's gonna pretty much do it for the Valley benchmark. I got a 220 overclock on my core, a 500 megahertz on my memory, and it's running great. So now I'm going to do that Blender benchmark one more time here, and we're going to see how much it actually helped 3D rendering to overclock our GPU. So I'm going to quick fire this up, and I need to change a few settings real quick here. Just rendering it at 320 by 280 tiles, and I was rendering just one GPU. So let me quick make that just one GPU there. And let's see what kind of overclock did to improve our score. Okay, and that finished at 30 seconds compared to 32 seconds before. So not a huge increase, but it is notable. A few seconds shaved off your time. And that's just because that Blender works better with more CUDA cores, and the clock speed isn't as important as the number of CUDA cores. But, I mean, 2 seconds is still 2 seconds, and with 2 GPUs rendering, that could be 4 seconds. So that's still pretty cool, and you'll see even more results when it comes to gaming benchmarks. Okay, so when you have an overclock that you're happy with now, you can save it like I said earlier by clicking that button and the profile you want to save it to, and then you'll want to check this button that is going to apply your overclock at startup. So you check that button, and then every time you reboot, your overclock is still going to be there, even without the application opening, you know, all the way. So that's a cool feature, and with that checked, we are ready to run with our overclock. Now I also want to do the 3D Mark Time Spy with and without the overclock to see just how much it really helps us. So to do this, I'm going to first clear my overclock, but since I have it saved, it's still there. I'm just going to hit that reset button, resets all of our settings to default, and then I'm going to run the 3D Mark Time Spy benchmark right here, and we'll see what it gets with and without the overclock, and then I'll finish up the video with the percentages. So that about wraps it up, guys, for the beginner's guide to overclocking your GPU. To kind of final things up, I got about an 8.3% increase on the Valley benchmark, and I imagine you get even higher results with a higher resolution monitor. That was just at 1080p. At higher resolutions, you tend to get even better results by overclocking. Then with the Time Spy 3D Mark benchmark, I got a 12% increase. So in a benchmark that's more geared towards gaming, you see even more performance increase with the overclock. So then with Blender 3D, we got about a 6.8% increase in rendering. So not as great when it comes to rendering, but I mean, it's still free performance. So I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe built some confidence in watching it. Maybe you'll be ready to go overclock your GPU now and see what kind of results you can get. If you have some good results, share them in the comments below. Let me know what you think of the video. Let me know if you liked it with a thumbs up. If you haven't seen it already, check out the CPU overclocking video that I did if you're interested in also overclocking your CPU. And that's going to do it for me, guys. So I'll see you all later. Bye!